On behalf of the European Migration Network Point, I'd like to welcome you to this session on preparedness for migration crisis. So, in the past, migration crises have been relatively distant concerns for Estonia, things that happen to other countries and where we would only play a minor supporting role. Now, however, a new crisis is unraveling at our own doorsteps. Earlier this year, EU and Belarus border crisis developed, and in recent months, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia have seen a dramatic increase in the numbers of migrants, many from the Middle East trying to enter the territories of these countries via Belarus. What makes the situation different from most other migrant crises is the fact that Belarus is believed to have orchestrated it in retaliation to EU sanctions and criticisms of the current regime. So Poland, Lithuania and Latvia have described the situation as hybrid warfare, calling it an incident of human trafficking of migrants waged by Belarus against the EU. Estonia has not been directly impacted by the crisis until this point, an associated mass influx, yet the country has started to actively secure its borders. In November, the government organized the SNAP exercise OKAS to test combat readiness of the reserve units of the Estonian Defence Forces. And as part of the exercise, we started also strengthening sections of the eastern border we share with the Russian Federation. So ensuring the preparedness for migration crisis is definitely something that's on the mind of the Estonian government at the moment. And while much of the media attention in Estonia has tended to revolve around security issues, there is a humanitarian crisis unraveling as well on the EU and Belarus border. So the situation is worsening, especially now as we're going into winter. So IOM has estimated that the total number of migrants and refugees that are currently in Belarus is around 7,000. And in the end of November, leading European civil society organizations working on asylum, migration, humanitarian assistance and human rights, they issued a joint statement demanding the EU to address the humanitarian crisis and to restore rights and values of Europe's borders. So essentially, the situation is very difficult and it is still unraveling. So what is our aim over the next hour and a half in this session is to discuss the preparedness of Baltic countries to deal with migration crisis, but also to explore some of the first lessons that we have learned from the current one. And how can we ensure that while protecting the borders, we can also protect the human rights? So the session today is structured as follows. We have four wonderful speakers joining us today from three Baltic countries who will each have 15 minutes for presentation. After this, there will be a discussion with the panelists. So one of the things I also wanted to note that on the side panel, because the session is in English, you can choose the language, but there is also a small box that says tasks. So these are different questions we have for the audience, so we would like to encourage you to answer them as well. The next speaker is from Latvia, and we will explore the situation there. So I'm delighted to introduce Līga Neidere, who is a policy advisor to the Minister of Interior of Latvia. She has extensive experience working on migration and security issues, both at the EU and national levels. So she will share now the Latvian experience countering hybrid attack on the border. Thank you so much for joining today, and please, the floor is yours.
So, good morning. Do you see my presentation?
Now we do.
Okay. So to start with, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here and to share our experience.
One thing, perhaps you can go on full screen, because currently it's kind of showing the PowerPoint application as well. So maybe the full screen mode will make it easier.
Sorry, I'm not the best. I don't know what I've done.
From the bottom of the right-hand side, there should be one of the visualizations is full screen. Yes.
This is okay.
Can you press on it?
Sorry?
It doesn't seem... it doesn't seem to. F5, can you try that?
No. I'm sorry that I'm such a...
No worries.
Bother.
That's... if you press F5, it doesn't...
I'm sorry, I really don't know what I've done.
Oh. Okay. We can just move on this way. It doesn't...
I'm sorry for taking the valuable time.
No, that's okay. Can you share the screen again?
So
the slides went off.
Your screen sharing? Oh, God. I feel ashamed, honestly, and I even haven't started talking yet.
No. Let's just continue the way it is. Just share the screen, and we can move from there. And afterwards, if it's okay with presenters, we can share the slides later on.
Can you see the presentation or not?
Now we do, so just move.
Okay. Let's pretend this never happened. Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I was watching with interest the presentation given by the Lithuanian colleague. And firstly, I would like to echo in strong terms that what we have at the border, it's not a migration crisis. And I put it also in the title of the presentation. We are countering a hybrid attack. I know that firstly, we all were quite hesitant how to call what happens there, but I think latest actions have showed that it is attack in its real sense. Also, Latvia took a decision to declare a state of emergency early in the August. We were following closely the development at the Lithuanian border, and we took the decision at the moment when we had already a bit more than 300 border crossers. I think we took this decision just on time. Originally, it was planned for 3 months, but now it is prolonged for 3 more months till the 10th of February. Honestly, I cannot say yet that it is the end of it. The state of emergency concerns only local municipalities bordering Belarus. And the aim of this decision is to prevent illegal migration organized by the Lukashenko regime under the disguise of tourism. It is exactly our understanding of what happens and what takes place there at the border. It is the same what the Lithuanian colleague described. And our government decision is in force, firstly, for a limited time and in the limited geographical territory, and concerns only those who cross the border illegally from the Belarus. I also have prepared some statistics. They are not as detailed as it was from the Lithuanian colleague, but I'm not from the State Border Guard, I'm from the ministry, so my views cannot be so detailed and so professional concerning exactly the situation at the border. But the point is that since the declaration of the state of emergency, we have deterred already more than 2,500 border crossing cases. And at the same time, since the declaration of the state of emergency, we have accepted 81 persons to cross the border on the grounds for humanitarian needs. To put this in perspective, last year in total, we have only 80 illegal border crossings. And it concerned both the border with Belarus and Russia, and also those illegal border crossers detained within the territory of Latvia. So this amount of attempts is something we haven't seen and experienced before. The same is true regarding the patterns regarding asylum applications. Last year, we had only 147 applications. This year, we have more than 500. And to be honest, more than 300 applications were made only within 10 days in August, which was also one of the reasons that made our government to take a decision. Just to point out this extreme situation and to highlight, we have never received so many applications, even during the previous migration crisis, 2015, 2016, when we were taking persons from Greece and Turkey. This is something we have never seen. I just can't stress it enough. And also, one of the reasons we acted so quickly is to avoid that our capacities are overstretched and our migration management system is under collapse. Also, we have accommodation centers overcrowded. This real number that shows 157 persons located in Muceniki and in Jurmala, that doesn't reflect the real picture of what we have taken in, because honestly, also what was mentioned by the Lithuanian colleague, secondary flows are working, and more than 300 persons.
Sorry, can I intervene? Could you tell us which slide you're on? Because the slides went off for the screen. So if you tell us the slide, we can put it on.
It's still on data and statistics. It's slide number 3.
3. Wonderful. Thank you. You can continue.
Okay. Yeah. Many of those asylum seekers have left Latvia. Latvia is not their final destination. It's never intended for them to stay in Latvia. I'm moving to the next slide. Support at the border with Belarus, so it would be for you easier to follow. It should be very important to stress that the state border guard is still the one responsible for border protection, but during this state of emergency, they are supported by state police and national armed forces. In addition, we rely on Frontex. Currently, only at the border with Belarus, we have 7 border officers with a patrol car and thermal vision vehicle. And also, in order to work with asylum seekers, we have EASO support for interpretation. They have very specific language knowledge. We cannot provide the interpreters by ourselves. And also, we have requested emergency financial assistance from the European Commission in order to address the issues of border control and accommodation and humanitarian needs for asylum seekers and detained persons. At the moment, we have requested, if I'm not wrong, 13.5 million euros, but still we are working on other issues to identify our needs. And among those needs, I should mention that it would be also the financing of the physical barrier at the border with Belarus. Very important issue for us is the protection of vulnerable persons. Our officials at the border have been instructed to carry out their duties with utmost care and respect for vulnerabilities. Since the declaration of the state of emergency in August, we have admitted 81 persons who were clearly vulnerable. Out of them, 30 are children, and we take in the whole families. We do not separate the families if we see that there is a need to help for one of them. Also, we carry out individual assessments of people's health. We work there with our health emergency service. Also, border guards provide food and water in cooperation with the local NGOs, clothes, raincoats, diapers, etc., depending on what is needed for there. And also, we find it very important to stress that currently there are now groups of people who would have been stuck at the Belarusian border in the vicinity of Latvia. Moving on to the next, I would like also to clarify our understanding of international obligations that are to be observed during even the crisis and during the state of emergency. We are fully aware of them, and we continue to observe regular principles of border control, international protection, and return procedure that requires individual assessment in order to detect any vulnerabilities and risks. We still have enforced the general laws, both on the state border guard and asylum law. Asylum applications are accepted at all other border crossing points and within the territory of Latvia. The only restriction concerns the territory of the state of emergency. And we also are we find it very important to stress that there are legal ways how to access the Latvian territory, and they can do that both by applying to humanitarian visas or applying to visas at the border crossing points. And moving to the next, what we are now working on and what we find of important relevance is the physical border security. We have already built a temporary barbed wire fence. It is for 37 kilometers. Our border guards have found it extremely useful in their work, and we are considering to prolong it for some 22 kilometers more. Also, in order to streamline the permanent construction process, National Parliament has adopted the law on construction of the external land border infrastructure. I assume it also follows a bit to the Lithuanian example, because we learned that they have something similar. And this law stipulates that the state and municipal authorities shall make priority to any decisions related to the building of the external border infrastructure. The construction itself will be carried out and provided by the state-owned company, State Real Estates. And we also have established a supervisory committee for building this infrastructure. This is led by the Minister of the Interior, and it has already started its work. And as I mentioned, we haven't amended our laws in general. We still work with a temporary legal act, which is the cabinet's decision, the government's decision on the state of emergency. But from our point of view, what we need to work in these kinds of situations, we need the amendments to the Schengen Borders Code. So we would have tools at our disposal to actively work against these kind of situations, against these hybrid attacks. And also what we have learned from our experience, that defining a hybrid attack might prove challenging. Just like Lithuanian colleague mentioned, we also have tried to update our national contingency plans, and to adapt it for these kinds of situations, it's almost impossible to agree on the definition what hybrid attack might be. Also, what we see, what is needed is to turn the practice and the recent judgment of the European Court of Human Rights into law, because these similar situations have been already judged by the court. Also, our understanding is that physical barriers at the border are not forbidden, but what we would like to see is explicitly mentioned to that. And also, I already mentioned that we are looking forward to the adequate funding from the European Commission on this, and this should be decided together with the appropriate amendments to the Schengen Borders Code. And now I'm turning to my last slide, and it concerns hostile narratives and disinformation, because we all know that hybrid operations usually have the disinformation component. And what we've seen is that main disinformation actors are Kremlin-controlled media and Belarus state media. Some of these hostile narratives find their ways into mainstream medias in the EU and the US. And also we have noted the main messages that are channeled through those media. And mostly they are like, Poland and Baltic states provoked a migration crisis. The EU pays for its aggressive policies. The EU is hypocritical, weak and helpless. EU sanctions for migration will be toothless. Poland benefits from the migration crisis, and also Belarusian regime are looking for the others to blame, like the US, the UK, etc., etc. And when treating with the situation, we also paying a lot of attention to this part of the hybrid attack. And this was the last thing I wanted to say, and I'm looking forward to the questions I might have later on. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm glad that technological issues were solved. Everything was great in the end, and thank you so much for these kind of nuances you brought to the table. So the next presentation we're going to focus on is from Estonian representative. So while Estonia has not experienced mass influx this year, the country has started to prepare for the possibility. And here to discuss this topic is Toomas Malva, who is working in the Ministry of Interior as an advisor in the Department of Internal Security and Crisis Preparedness. Mr. Malva is a police colonel who has more than 30 years of experience in police and prison services and has participated in many foreign missions as well, linked to mass influx in Croatian and Slovenian Turkish-Greek borders. I believe Mr. Malva will speak in Estonian, if I understand correctly. Yeah, so those who need a translation, please change the channel. And also there are questions, so if you, we would like you to kind of answer, the public to answer the questions as well. But now, Mr. Malva, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Echo, a bit of
Meil on
echo.
Kaja.
We can hear you.
I don't have a presentation, so I'll have no technical problems with the slides. My purpose is, within the 5 minutes, maybe slightly longer, to talk about what is the mass influx of migrants. Is it possible in Estonia? Is Estonia prepared for that? Everything I'm going to talk about is based on my personal experience from 30 years in police structures. As by way of introduction is mentioned, I have participated in Slovenia 2015, in Greek borders 2016 and 17, and within the police and border guards major exercises in 2019 and 20. I have also independently watched the situation in 2015 in Europe, also what happened in Finland has affected my understanding in the Mediterranean countries in 2020 on the Greek-Turkish border, and 2021 the Belarusian topic of the recent times. I have tried to understand what mass influx means. For me, it's like migration. Let's say that people just moving from one region to another, whether permanently or temporarily. And it has happened throughout the history of mankind. There have been groups of people traveling from one place to another. Maybe our ancestors are from Eastern Africa and have reached the current destination through the centuries. And I have tried to understand that migration could be either voluntary or forced, and what are the reasons. If the climate changes, there is no food, it's difficult to live there, natural disasters, or the political situation in the country that causes war or repressions. So these are the drivers of migration. Attractive features is the welfare or the existence of the relative communities already in other countries. It's important to understand that there is regular and irregular migration. I have personally observed irregular migration, which means that every country has the right to decide who can enter the country, who can stay in this country, and who is not allowed to stay there. The state should have the right to check the borders, designate the border crossing points, and if these points are not observed, so that's act against the sovereignty. of the country. Mostly people who need international protection, fleeing from war zones or natural disasters, people who are victims of the crime, have been trapped by smugglers who are looking for better living conditions, but they can also be a threat to the security of another country. In Slovenia and Greece, most of the people, I have divided them into two categories. Young men, just empty pockets, try to as rapidly to reach the destination as possible. There were many in Slovenia who tried to rapidly reach Germany. Another 50%, among whom 30% are men, are families. And there are many vulnerable groups, pregnant, sick persons, children. And the paradox I have heard, when asked who would be able to quickly integrate in the new place of living, they say that the integration will be slow, that they will be able to return to their home country. And when they are economic migrants, they could quicker integrate into the host country society. For me, it has also been important to understand what is the benefit of migration and illegal benefits or gains. We know that in 2015, more than 90% of foreigners used the intermediaries, meaning they paid somebody so they could move. It is said that in 2015, criminal organizations gained up to $6 billion of criminal income. Most probably it was much bigger. And another illegal benefit is the political benefits. Through migration, it's possible to exert pressure on another country in order to achieve their concessions, dialogues, or spreading fear. Who could be hit by mass migration? I believe every country could be hit by it. Where these factors exist, if there is a war or disaster in the neighboring country, or better economic conditions in another. The question, could Estonia face mass influx threat? I would bring 3 examples. One of them we have witnessed in Estonia, people have talked about it, that mass influx is like water which comes as a wave, hits us. And if there's a good barrier, it finds the weakest spot in this barrier. Another example, in 2015, I participated in many lectures and discussions where I presented a Finnish example. Nobody would have believed that in Norway, near the Murmansk border, migrants will come from Africa or Central Asia, try to cross the border. It's clear that they were assisted by somebody, not so much by the criminals, but maybe the politicians. When I met somebody from Iceland during the training, and we said, by jokingly, you are in a better position, you are living so far, nobody will come to your country. He said, on the contrary, the moment Panama said that it's prepared to accept migrants, so the ships tried to enter Canada as well, and Iceland also is affected by migration. depending on the driving factors. What has been our plan? As I have until 2020 working for the border and police guards, now I work for the Ministry of Interior. I have been engaged in preparing these plans. We tried and tested the plans at exercises hotspot. If such situation should arise, like it was in Finland or Norway, what will be our first responses? First of all, to localize the migrants, to direct them to centers where they will be processed, to assist them, to check whatever belongings they are carrying, to register them, to determine who is who needs assistance, which status to accord or to extradite, and then send them to the accommodation centers. And during this exercise, we learned a lot that we could implement. In the wider world, it became clear that our success is guaranteed if the migrants refuse from cooperation in Slovenia, as I was deployed to Croatian border. All those who received information or assistance from us were grateful, but our good colleagues, Latvians, who helped Slovenia on the Slovenian-Austria border every evening, were in a difficult situation in dire straits because Austria refused entry, and the Latvians in Slovenia had to resolve these conflicts. So we proceed from the understanding that if we assist and provide information, success will be granted. What is our new plan, depending on the situation on the Belarusian border? The situation is quite different there. It's called pushback. Can we apply this method? Are we allowed to do it? On the Greek border, we have seen how the Greek border guards just pushed back the inflatable boats. It is a rather extreme measure because people can be drowned at sea. In order for our new plan to be functionable, we should act decidedly like the neighbors, Latvians and Lithuanians, who decided to hinder mass influx, build the physical barriers. We also have temporarily used this approach. We could understand what we could do, actually, what we are capable of doing. We should have also the legal basis for actions, so the migrants will realize that they are not in the possession of certain rights if they are irregularly entering the country. It's possible also to exercise pressure on Iraqi airlines, and in conformity of the EU regulations, they should also be seriously reviewed in order to avoid the repetition of such situation on the EU borders. The question, are we ready? We are always prepared. Whether this plan is good enough, time will show. It's important to have good allies, that we have solidarity with the allies, help them, and then they will help us. That's all from me.
Thank you. Aitäh. We'll come back to again during the discussion on some of the kind of things that Estonia has done. But now, last but not least, we have predominantly until this point focused on security considerations, but the humanitarian issues and the protection of individual rights in midst of the crisis is just as critical, as was pointed out by the Latvian speaker as well. But now I'm very happy to have Eero Janson joining us today to delve into the topic of upholding human rights in a situation of migration. Mr. Janson is head of Estonian Refugee Council. He manages and designs the Refugee Council's humanitarian aid interventions in Ukraine, Georgia, Jordan, Lebanon, and Kenya. And currently is the member of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles Board. So thank you so much, Eero. The floor is yours.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you and see the slides.
Correct. So thank you also from my side. And as already introduced, then I'm rather going to take a bit of a critical stance on what has taken place on the Latvian-Lithuanian-Polish border over the past months. So according to the IOM Missing Migrants project, since August this year, at least 16 people, including 3 children, are known to have died from exhaustion, hypothermia, and other medical conditions on the Belarus-EU border. With temperature falling now to sub-zero, we can only imagine the extent of loss of life which may result going further. Those who have died are among the people described not just as a threat, but in this new twist of dehumanizing and anti-asylum rhetoric as hybrid threat. The situation has clearly been caused by Belarus, which decided to use or to weaponize people in order to extract concessions on sanctions, and also as revenge for support to the Belarusian opposition. Hybrid warfare involves the use of non-conventional arms, and people are used here in order to hurt the European Union. But all accounts suggest that
kuid kõik aruanded näitavad, et nende inimeste seas, kes on sattunud nendesse olukordadesse, on väga haavatavad, nende seas rasedad, perekonnad lastega, vanurid, vigastatud inimesed, nende seas on inimesed põgenesid Süüriast, Jeemenist, Afganistanist tagakiusamise eest, kellel polnud seaduslikke või seaduslike rändeteede võimalust ja kui nad põgenesid oma päritoluriigist, on nad muutunud nüüd pantideks teises geopoliitilises võimumängus. Vaatamata nendele tõsistele pingetele, mis on tekkinud riikide vahel, olukord nagu paljudel teistel Euroopa Liidu piiridel on siiski hallatav.
Globally, many countries in very fragile situations face complex displacement challenges with geopolitical...
Can I just quickly intervene, because the slides are not moving.
That's by design, yes.
Okay, very good. Very good. Just wanted to check. All is good. Thank you.
Yeah. So as I was saying, then globally there are many countries with in very fragile situations, facing complex displacement challenges with geopolitical and security dimensions and involving far larger number of people. Think of Turkey hosting some 4 million refugees from Syria, or Pakistan hosting some 3.5 million Afghans. In Belarus, we have a few thousand people behind the border, and panic ensues. What is needed in Europe is a clear-headed response that includes a firm defense of the right to asylum and of EU and international law. Belarus knows fully well that asylum and migration, these are issues which are a weak spot for the EU. European panic and division in the face of displacement is exploited by dictators world over. In this context, migration has become a geopolitical issue because manipulation of migration flows can be used to gain advantages and extract concessions from Europe. We have seen it all play out with Turkey before. But just because the people on the borders have been put in this situation by exploitative forces, the EU states are not absolved, and I emphasize, they are not absolved of their legal obligations and moral responsibilities towards the people in question. This panicked response, which we have seen, appears to play perfectly into the hands of Lukashenko regime and his big brother in Russia. Our core values of respect for human rights and rule of law, the values based on which EU has been founded, are being tested. And it seems that we are not really passing this test. Therefore, looking at the responses of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia over these past months, several problems must be highlighted. And I will now bring out four main concerns. So, first, access to asylum at the borders. Since July, with Belarus's support, some thousands of people have crossed the borders into the EU, and thousands more were prevented from accessing the EU territory. At the borders, there have been multiple apparent breaches of EU law and international law taking place, including summary removals, collective expulsions, violent pushbacks, and denial of access to asylum procedure. All of these constituting violations under the European Convention on Human Rights, wider international human rights law, and also under EU's own law. Lithuanian, Polish, Latvian NGOs, also Amnesty International and other international organizations, are documenting these infractions as best they can, despite the often very limited access to the areas and people affected. Under EU and international law, everyone seeking asylum at the borders, irrespective of their manner of arrival, has the right to make an asylum application. Access to the asylum system in Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia should immediately be restored, both in law and in practice, in accordance with EU law and international law. This means ending the unlawful practices such as summary expulsions and pushbacks, or prohibiting people's asylum applications from being lodged through limiting effective access to the procedure via geographical restrictions on where the asylum claims can be lodged, or attempting to derogate from asylum law and protections against refoulement. This brings me to the second one, guaranteeing humanitarian access. What we have seen play out on the Polish border over the past months is highly concerning. It is essential that the states involved in this situation grant humanitarian access to the people affected so that humanitarian organizations can reach the people on the borders and provide assistance. The fact that EU member states prevent the delivery of life-saving assistance to people, some of whom are extremely vulnerable, is deplorable. It's reckless. It furthermore risks having negative implications for humanitarian access in the displacement contexts beyond Europe, and undermines EU's role as a credible humanitarian actor. The European Union prides itself in being the guarantor of humanitarian principles and being the largest humanitarian donor in the world. And this is not at all reflected on the EU's own borders. Humanitarian access must never be impeded, as it has been done in this context. This brings me to the third issue, legislative changes. There have been by now numerous legislative changes in Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, with many elements of these changes incompatible with EU law. In Lithuania, for example, the changes introduced over summer restrict access to asylum by allowing refusal of asylum applications in certain circumstances and unduly restricting the locations where applications may be submitted, and by removing protections for vulnerable people in increasingly used accelerated procedures. The Lithuanian measures further allow for automatic detention, restrict access to an effective legal remedy, and restrict access to reception conditions. Many aspects of these changes raise concerns as to their conformity with EU and international law, including EU asylum law, the treaties, and the Charter for Fundamental Rights. In Poland, the recent legal amendments include provisions that people may be removed from Poland even after they apply for international protection, and without examination of whether the removal will lead to a violation of human rights. In addition, there are provisions that allow the state to leave aside without examining applications for international protection made immediately after unauthorized border crossing. These measures, again, appear to be in violation with EU asylum law, with the treaties, as well as the Charter, as well as international law. The European Commission needs to follow through on its requests to member states to remove aspects of the legislation which violate EU law. Compliance with EU law should be a basic condition for any kind of EU support. And if member states refuse to respect EU and international law, infringement procedures, disciplinary measures should be considered. Yet, as we saw yesterday, rather than safeguarding the EU law, the Commission seems to be looking for ways to legalize some of these unlawful practices under the guise of emergency measures, thus normalizing dehumanization and suffering of people at the borders. And this brings me to the final point, which is repression of civil society and media and legal practitioners on the borders. The situation on the EU's borders has provoked attempts by the member states to intimidate and repress independent civil society, media and legal practitioners seeking to respond in line with their professional functions. Activities aimed at providing humanitarian assistance and legal aid to people at the border must never be criminalized or penalized. Banning access to the border zones to civil society or journalists not only leaves people without support, but also has repercussions for the work of independent civil society and media even beyond Europe. It is essential that the situation in the border area is monitored by independent actors to ensure that EU and international law are being respected. Acts of violence inflicted by any side need to be reported and investigated. So, to take it all together, no one is condoning the actions of Lukashenko, which have been clearly unethical and manipulative, and have put people at immense risk. In some cases, Belarus may have acted in cooperation with countries of origin of people at the borders and was no doubt aided and abetted by Russia for its own political gain. Nevertheless, the responses of the EU member states appear to violate EU and international law, and sometimes even basic morality. They need to be met with adequate response, not the continued repetition of condemnation of Belarus. That by now, I think, goes without saying. Regardless of how people cross the border, international and EU law applies, including the right to claim asylum, rather than a calm condemnation of Belarus combined with collective management of this situation. There has been a panic, dramatic overreaction, which plays into the hands of those on the other side of this conflict. And other countries also learn how to hit the EU where it hurts. So there are no winners in this conflict. There surely are losers. The main ones in this context are the people stranded at the border. These people caught in the middle are exactly that. They are people. Please do not forget that. They are not arms or weapons or hybrid threats or whatever other terms may be used to divest them of their humanity and the rights that come from this humanity. So thank you for now, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eero, but I want to also thank all the four speakers for talking about definitely on a very heated topic. And there is, as the situation is unraveling, there is so much kind of unknown involved with it, and solutions are being seeked out as we go on. So essentially what I kind of hope to do now, because when it comes to the panel discussion and when it comes to the topic of the workshop, it talks about the migration preparedness. So how do you kind of prepare the system to deal with these challenges? Because I think it was nicely pointed out by the Lithuanian and Latvian speakers that they are seeing a situation that is completely unprecedented for them. So they have had to kind of improvise on the go. And what I would like us to discuss in general is, are there ways in which we can create systems that there is less improvisation, that allows the protection of borders, but also human rights within it. But before we go into that, one of the kind of general questions, because the topic of hybrid warfare, hybrid attacks has come up today, and obviously media is using this quite a lot. And obviously migration in the past, it has been always in some way or another part of foreign relations. And, you know, for instance, the European Commission in the new pact proposal stressed this as well, that, you know, migration is going to be a major consideration in all international relations and engagements it goes with. But what is new is this kind of situation where essentially migrants, as the last speaker pointed out, are used as weapons. So I was wondering, in terms of these hybrid attacks, and this is kind of a question to all the speakers, is this situation we see on the kind of EU-Belarus border very much linked to the context, or is this a new migration reality that we as migration researchers, people who work in this field, need to factor in now, that the hybrid attacks involving the use of migrants is going to become the norm? And perhaps I'll give the floor to our international speakers first. So maybe Latvian speaker, if she's not there, if she's there.
I am here.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. Thank you for the question. And I can give only my assessment on the situation.
Of course.
I think, firstly, I completely agree with the last presenter saying that these are despicable actions of the Belarus regime and that we should respect the human aspect of that. And that's my sincere wish that this is not the pattern to be evolving in the future. I choose to believe that this is a specific situation, and also what we have seen before, the similar actions has been carried out by Turkey or with Greece, and also it has taken place in some sort. I think we all remember the polar route when the Russians just opened the borders with Norway, and that is every situation has been, and there has been some reason for that, and I don't think that this is a pattern that will evolve. There is some conflict, and this is the way how some leaders choose to solve it. And no, it won't be a permanent pattern.
Lithuania?
Yeah, actually, totally agree what was said about human rights. Of course, when there is a situation like that, we always will see the balance between the side of national security, EU security, and the human rights. I would say more, actually. The situation like that probably is, it's just the consequences. It's not the aim, it's not the problem itself. And how did it happen? Of course, it's because of the failure of international cooperation, the failure of political level actions between countries, between EU and maybe other countries. But still, we have to know that until there is regimes in other countries, we will have the problems like that. Until there is only one person who makes the decisions to make an influence, until we will have the problems and the situations on the border. And actually, I totally agree with the colleague, Eero, who was speaking about those 4 main pillars, which probably is under big question what's going on the borders. But we have to keep in mind that still the process of controlling migration and the process of asylum seeker procedure is going on. Just one of the examples. We all know what is the political situation in Belarus, and we know what's the situation of the opposition of Belarus. So even during this extreme situation and the state of emergency, none of the Belarusian person who entered or who crossed the border illegally was not returned back, and he's in the process. None of those. But when people are weaponized, and when people come to the safe country with a travel visa, when he travels through 2 or 3 safe countries, and he's not asking for asylum, and when he's trying to cross the border illegally to EU by saying, this is not the country I want to get to, I want to get to Germany, we have to evaluate those facts also. So what I want to say that those human rights, right for asylum, those really the priority, but they cannot overcome other aspects or other obligations for every person, and it cannot affect the security of other country they want to enter, or the EU. This should be the balance. And what we have, what kind of international legislation we have about asylum, about human rights, that's definitely the priority. But those were created during the Second World War and straight after that. So we really had a different situation that we have now. And when those are used for weaponizing people, somehow you have to react. And there is a legal way, what we want to say, there is a legal way, please use it. And here you are Lithuania, here you are European Union. Just take those obligations and make everything in proper way. Thank you.
Thank you. Eero, perhaps one of the questions to you, because you were talking about this weaponization in kind of relation to the point, what could be done that then, when the hybrid attacks happen, that migrants wouldn't be weaponized? Is there kind of societal narratives? Is there something that governments or authorities could do to minimize that migrants do become weaponized this way? Because it seems to be very much information warfare.
Thank you. First of all, I'll respond to a few issues, things that were brought out by previous speakers. So first of all, just as for basic understanding, then refugee becomes a refugee from the moment he or she leaves his country of origin. Whatever the number of countries he or she goes through on the journey, he or she still stays a refugee. Estonians took very lengthy pathways, reaching Canada and US and Australia, etc. After and during the Second World War. It didn't make them less refugees. They are refugees because they are unable to return to their home country. It doesn't change when you cross borders, multiple borders over your journey. And so this was the first thing I wanted to emphasize. Secondly, yes, many of these human rights laws were put in place after the Second World War. This is true for most of the human rights legislation, international laws out there. They have become customary law, including right to asylum. There should not be any question about the fact that right to asylum is a basic human rights, and a basic human right which guarantees other rights. You cannot have right to life if you cannot be able to seek safety in a different country when you are being persecuted or your life is in danger in the country of your origin. But coming now to your question, then of course, I mean, there are so many layers to this conflict. There's information, warfare, if you will. So people are being given information which is not always true, and there are many ways that you can also limit this kind of manipulation of what kind of information is given to people, what kind of puts them on the move. People who have crossed the borders to Lithuania, for example, who are waiting in the no man's land on the borders, you find Afghans, you find Syrians, you find Iraqis, you find people who are coming from countries which are either in war or where you have very serious human rights issues in this country. So we may say that the protection rate, the potential protection rate of these people is very high when you look at the past statistics. But combating this, I mean, many of them do need international protection and would get international protection if given the opportunity to lodge their asylum applications.
Thank you. Mr. Malva, maybe I'll turn to you about the Estonian situation, because obviously this kind of session focuses on the preparedness for migration, and Estonia hasn't experienced a mass influx. But you were saying as well from your previous experience, you know, there are these kind of different groups. Some are more, you see as more vulnerable, others while economic migrants are easier to integrate. So it's a kind of a nuanced situation. But I was, in terms of the hybrid attacks, first of all, do you think something like that, how likely is it in the context of Estonia? And the other thing, we're talking about preparing, securing the borders. Is there something that can be done in order to prepare, to protect the human rights or vulnerability detection? What is Estonia doing in that sphere?
Since it's a very sensitive topic, I will
continue speaking in Estonian. Well, first, unfortunately, I think that taking advantage of people and weaponizing them, sending them across borders to another country to influence that country, it will become more and more the norm. It's not only in Europe, we've seen it in the United States as well, where migrants were moving through the Central American states, and the situation was quite similar to what we are witnessing now. I'm a rapid responder in my character, I would say, and the crisis preparedness is in my blood. And what we can do, in my opinion, is emergency contingency plans. Whether these plans work once the situation comes, well, it's never 100% because there are so many factors that change. I think we have to help people as much as we can, but the help cannot be an objective as such, so that someone would take advantage of it. Democracy is a wonderful thing, but it's a long term. It takes a lot of time. You come together, you discuss things, you change the rules, you agree on something, but at the same time, simultaneously, the migration flow continues. So I said a few things about the 2015 crisis when we had the first mass influx to Europe. Now it's 2021. Have we been successful in handling this? No. Tens of thousands of people came to Slovenia. Most of them ended up in Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, France. How many were deported? And again, when we talk about deportations, you can only use it if they are accepted somewhere, if there is a country that accepts them or that you can send them to, or you know where to send them to. So there are enormous problems in this context. As I said, I'm a rapid responder. We have to be quite decisive in our actions. Latvia, Lithuania and Poland have been very decisive, and there are some drawbacks. As it was mentioned here, people have died and their human rights have been breached. So what we have to do, what we can do, is to adjust the rules. That would be my summary.
Switch back to English, but kind of in continuation what was just said, because it's a question again to Latvia and Lithuania, because one of the ways in which you have handled is the creation of the state of emergency, which obviously gives the state a lot of valuable tools to react. And you know, if it is seen as a sudden crisis, a sudden attack, you need these rights. But obviously, as was pointed out by Mr. Malva as well, it kind of comes with its own tests to a democratic system. So maybe I was wondering, from your experience, do you see certain legislative amendments that could be done in long run, that if there would be further situations of mass influx, that you can kind of prepare for this in the future that would perhaps improve the system? So essentially, now, having had this experience, is there something you would kind of change in the law to facilitate moving forward? Yes, Latvian.
Yes, thank you. I mentioned this already in my presentation, that what we need actually is the amendment at the EU level, because the border we protect, the border we guard, is the EU border. And for this, we need the higher level amendments just at the national level. Also, I think that we, together with the Lithuanians, have a quite clear picture what we would like to see in those amendments. And we are looking forward next week for the Commission's proposal on that. And a note to Eero regarding what he said, that Latvia has amended laws to restrict the access to asylum. Actually, Latvia hasn't done that. We have only temporary regulation for that situation of emergency, and it's restricted in time and also in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Lithuanian, would you like to add something?
Actually, totally agree. We all know that I guess 12 European countries are in line or in the group which initiates the legislation of migration regulation, and actually this is what we are waiting for, whether the actions that is now implemented in our countries, we all know that there are negotiations, whether they are in line with European law or not. And we hope actually that on the European level, the attention will be paid to the crisis or to those new issues where we have a gap in the EU regulation, because we are not prepared for the problems like that. If we will be still not changing our minds and not changing our regulations, we will still be having the problems like we have now between the borders from France to UK, for example, and so on. So we have to regulate that, and this is on the EU level. On national level, I guess we've done quite enough, and those changes in all the countries just shows that probably this is the way we should choose. We will see.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm being signaled. It's time to wrap up this session. Obviously, there is so much that still needs to be discussed. And from the last answers, some of these discussions need to be moved to the EU level to see. We will share the different results of the questions we up during the session. This is the word cloud from what is important for dealing with the migrant crisis, and the biggest word for those who don't speak Estonian is cooperation. So obviously, I hope this exchange of ideas that we had today here is a small step towards much bigger discussions that need to be had. I really want to thank all the speakers for joining us here, talking about this very difficult topic. I know all of you have so much more to say, but hopefully these discussions will continue. Thank you so much.